Thank you for joining me today as we continue our survey of the New Testament. In previous lessons, we started a basic study of the New Testament focusing on the historical books first. We have only just begun to dig into the Gospel of Matthew and examine the Old Testament references Matthew makes so frequently in his Gospel. You may recall that in the last lesson, we took a closer look at the miraculous birth of Jesus and how his birth is the sign promised in Isaiah 7:14. Today we will continue our study by focusing on the second chapter of Matthew, specifically the Visit of the Magi. Let's begin. Today's scripture reference is Matthew 2:1-12 and Micah 5:2. I always like to read the scriptures out loud in their entirety. So let's take a closer look at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1-12. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where the Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah. For out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, Go and search diligently for the young child, and when you have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, and frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. An outline of the passage would look like this. Let's look at verse 1 again, Jesus' birthplace. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. Matthew begins chapter 2 by telling us, through Joseph's eyes, where Jesus was born. Bethlehem of Judea. Jesus was born in the very town that King David had been born in. This is a good place to mention the Old Testament prophet Micah, who prophesied that Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Let's look at that verse. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose going forths are from old, from everlasting. Micah was a contemporary of the prophet Isaiah, and prophesied at the same time as Isaiah, just in a different part of Israel. Micah's prophecy of where Messiah would be born adds to the prophecy of Isaiah 7:14, which told us that Messiah would be born of a virgin. So we can sum this up by saying that these two Old Testament prophets, prophesying hundreds of years prior to Jesus, give an idea that Messiah would not only be born of a virgin, but that he would be born in Bethlehem. So from this small prophecy in Micah 5:2, we see Messiah's birthplace is the same as King David. Messiah would be born to fulfill a divine mission. Messiah was from long ago, from everlasting. These words in the Hebrew language are strong, and refer to God the Father in Psalm 90, verse 2, and the voice of wisdom in Proverbs 8, verses 22 through 23. Last, Messiah would be human and divine. Now that we know Jesus was not only born of a young, virgin, Jewish woman, but that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, the very place the prophet Micah foretold Messiah would come. Let's take a look at more pieces of this puzzle. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. I just love biblical history, so we will get a brief history lesson here. Matthew does not tell us the exact date of Jesus' birth, but he does tell us the time period, the days of Herod the king. This Herod, who was also called Herod the Great, ruled during the period of Roman dominance, 37 BC to 4 BC. He was an important figure in the life of Rome and the Jews of Israel. Herod was from Edom. Remember, Esau was from Edom. Herod was ruthless at times and had many personal problems. If you thought your family had problems, study Herod's family and you will most definitely feel better about your own family. Herod not only murdered one wife, but he murdered 2 sons as well. It was said of Herod, "It is better to be Herod's pig than to be his son." In 40 BC, the Roman Senate declared Herod to be the king of the Jews. This same man was despised by the Jews, and he sought their favor and approval by adding to the Jewish temple. The temple became quite lavish, but eventually was destroyed in 70 AD. Herod died in 4 BC, approximately 2 years after Jesus' birth. So now that you know a little more about the days of Herod, let's look at the visit of the Magi, which is our main focus today. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. An outline of the Magi visit would look like this: their arrival in Jerusalem, their seeking of the King of the Jews, being guided by the Shekinah glory, Herod the Great's unrest, Micah 5:2, finding Jesus and heading home. By the time the Magi visited Jesus, he was approximately 2 years old. He was not a baby in the manger, like many songs and pictures represent. The passage tells us Jesus was a child, and the Magi found Jesus with his mother in a house, not a manger. The wise men were Babylonian astrologers, and there was an unknown number of wise astrologers, and they were not 3 kings, as the song goes. The wise men began seeking out a child who was born King of the Jews. But how did they know anything about a Jewish king? And why did they want to worship him? I will seek to answer this question, but before I do, let's look at the star that guided the wise men to Jesus. The star. Is the star mentioned by Matthew a literal star or something else? Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum explains in his book Messianic Christology that this star is not a literal star because it is the personal star of the King of the Jews. It appears and disappears. It moves from east to west and north to south. It literally hovers over one specific house in Bethlehem. Now I know that God created the heavenly bodies, and yes, this could be a literal star. However, I love Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum's explanation much better than this being a literal star. Dr. Fruchtenbaum explains the fact that this star comes in the form of a light is actually the Shekinah glory, which is the visible manifestation of God's presence. Throughout the Old Testament, God's presence, or Shekinah glory, as his presence was called, came in the form of a light, fire, or a cloud. These wise men from the east, who made a practice of studying the signs in the heavens, saw a new light and followed it. They were actually following the Shekinah glory. So whether the star mentioned in Matthew is a literal star or the Shekinah glory isn't as important as the fact that God divinely guided these wise men through a sign in the heavens to Jesus. Now, why would God do that if Jesus was simply a charismatic Jewish teacher? Next, how would these Gentiles from Babylon know about the birth of a Jewish king? And why would they desire to worship him? To answer these questions, we must look to the Old Testament. The only book of the Old Testament to date Messiah's first coming is the book of Daniel, specifically the 77s of Daniel, chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. Let's just take a brief look at these. Remember, the book of Daniel was not written in Israel, but was written in Babylon, mostly in Aramaic, the language of the Babylonians. You may recall that due to Daniel's ability to interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he was given an influential position as chief astrologer. However, Daniel was a worshiper of Yahweh and knew that his special ability to interpret dreams was really a gift from God. Because of Daniel's influence, it is more than possible that many Babylonian astrologers became believers in Daniel's God, especially since his divine gift saved their lives. Since Daniel's book, telling when the Messiah would arrive, was penned in Babylon, these Babylonian astrologers were familiar with this prophecy and most likely passed it along from generation to generation. Another question is, how did these same astrologers know anything about a star? Once again, we must look to the Old Testament, specifically to the prophecy of Balaam. You may recall that Balaam was hired by the king of Moab to curse Israel, but he was unable to do anything but bless them. Balaam gave 4 messianic prophecies. One states the following: I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come forward from Jacob, and a scepter shall rise from Israel, and it shall crush the forehead of Moab. Numbers 24, verse 17. Balaam prophesied of the coming Messiah and related his coming to a star. This prophecy is not speaking of a literal star because it says a scepter shall rise from Israel. Star and scepter are one and the same and speak of royalty. The star of Jacob will be a king. It is interesting to note that Balaam was also an astrologer from Babylon too. So we now have 2 connections to Babylon, Daniel and Balaam. I was just thinking about how for stars, who are considered important people of our day, we roll out the red carpet for them. But for Jesus, the star of Jacob, God rolled out a new heavenly light, his own Shekinah glory, his presence to guide these Gentile seekers to the Messiah that both Balaam and Daniel told them about so very long ago. The scriptures tell us that God watches over his word to perform it, and he certainly watched over his word concerning Messiah, and Matthew wanted to show us that. God is still in the practice of guiding men and women to his promised Messiah, and I pray that this study guides you to Jesus. Thank you for joining me today as we examined the Scriptures. I hope that this study points you to Jesus, the Star of Israel. But we aren't finished yet. Join me next week as we continue our study of Matthew's Gospel. Our next lesson is titled Out of Egypt, from Matthew chapter 2, verse 13 through 15. Our study of Matthew has only just begun. Stay tuned. Let me end this broadcast by saying, the Lord bless you, the Lord keep you, the Lord lift up his countenance to you, the Lord be gracious to you and give you his sweet shalom. Till next time.